I want to talk a little bit, first of all, let's just get this out of the way. I have 9 children. Okay, good enough. The gasps. Are they done? Okay. My darling wife is sitting right over here. Hello there, baby doll. I just want to talk a little bit this morning on this topic of end, which was chosen for me by my daughter, which I'm so happy that she did. It's an interesting topic. When I was a little boy, my parents would take me every Friday to my paternal grandmother's house in Sloan, New York, the metropolis of Sloan, which was said that you never need to leave the borders because everything you need is within the village of Sloan. But my grandmother lived there. She was, this typical little old Polish grandma. She was chubby, and she was kind and soft-spoken. She cooked constantly. And we would go every Friday so that my father could either mow or shovel, which is what we do in Buffalo, right? We either mow or shovel. And every Friday we would go there and we would walk into the house. She would know we were coming, and yet it was her routine that she would be sitting there in her lazy boy recliner praying on her rosary beads, and we would walk in very quietly as children and give her a little peck on the cheek, and her lips would be moving and doing her prayers, and we would have to wait until she got through her rosary beads, and then she would get up and the feast would begin, right? And the food would come out. And she knew I loved salami, and there was always salami on the table. And if there wasn't, we would go to Mrs. Sophie's Deli, and she would give me some salami there and a quarter. So it was a wonderful routine. And when I was 12 years old, my grandmother suddenly died. And I remember, I'm 52 years old, and it's making me think about her. I remember driving to the cemetery and being immensely angry at the world. Not because of my loss, not because she had to die, not because she was gone and I was going to miss her. I was angry at the world because as I was looking out the window as my father drove me to the cemetery, no one seemed to care. They were still going to the store. They were still driving to work. Children were still going to school. And my world was falling to pieces. And no one seemed to care. And I was angry about that. And I'm 52 years old, as I said, and I still feel that way sometimes when things happen in my life. 3 years ago, my beloved spouse of 30 years called me on the phone and said, I think I'm going to die. I said, call an ambulance. I'll be there in a minute. And we got to Buffalo General Hospital, and she was already in a coma, and she had an enormous bleed in her brain. And they told me she wasn't going to make it. And I was angry at this entire situation. There were people in the waiting room at Buffalo General complaining that they had to wait so long because they stubbed their toe. And I wanted to scream at them. My wife is dying. And sometimes we experience those emotions when enormous upheavals happen in our lives. It's a natural thing to happen. Everything that we see and hear and touch and smell and taste and experience must inevitably end. Nothing is permanent. When I was 20 years old, I knew everything. I knew how to raise children, right? I didn't have any, but I knew how to raise children. And I felt free to tell people how to raise their children, especially at the restaurants that I would frequent. I knew everything about what would constitute a good marriage. I knew everything about what constituted a good man in the community, or a good woman, or a good person. I knew it all at the age of 20. And over the years, what I found was those thoughts, those ideas, those notions developed and changed and sometimes ended. Everything ends. When something ends, it disrupts our routine, right? When we have a job, we get up in the morning, we get ready for that job, we have a certain routine that we do. We put, if you have an enormous beard like this because you're in a Shakespeare play, you oil the beard and you put in the stuff in your hair because normally you don't have hair like this, it's all cropped. We go to that job, we perform in that job. When those things change, when people leave us through death or changes in relationship, those routines are upset. They're changed. All right? And we find ourselves sometimes in a void. It disrupts that. The familiarity that we have in those situations is disrupted. Sometimes we don't know when change is coming, but sometimes we do. And sometimes that is so anxiety-ridden as we prepare for it. On Sunday, I'm going to end this whole Shakespeare run that we've had, and I'm anticipating that with a sense of happiness because, boy, oh boy, I can mow my lawn again. But I'm also anticipating sadness that I'm going to have to say goodbye to these people that I love to work with. I'm there with them every night of the week. I see them in their underwear. I love them. But when we anticipate that something is going to end, it can produce anxiety in our lives. Sudden changes can be very painful and very traumatic. Loss of a loved one, loss of a beloved pet, loss of a job, ending of a relationship, the parting of friends. When I was in high school, I was worried about what kind of sneakers I had, right? And the jeans that I wore had to be Jordache. Most of you don't even know what that is. Gloria Vanderbilt for the ladies. I worried about what people thought of me in that regard, about the way I parted my hair and the way I combed it, and maybe my breath wasn't so good. And then when I got older, I started worrying about what do people think about the job that I have, about the prestige that I have, the education level that I have, about the behavior of my children. And these things, as we grow, change. What our expectations out of life change. What we believe to be true ends. Some endings are very happy. I mean, sooner or later, Game of Thrones will be done, right? Is it done? I don't watch it. But when it was done and you had your last episode, people anticipated, what's going to happen? How is it going to end? You know, some shows like MASH and other, now I'm dating myself. They have these final episodes and everybody tunes in. They want to see how it ends because it's an anticipation of how things might end. What might be the result? How do people's lives change based on what they experienced in this show? When we leave a job for another job, we anticipate what that job's going to be like. I don't know about you, but whenever I start a new job, I always I have this dream that I'm going to show up on the first day in my bathrobe. I don't know how that happens, but I do. There's that anxiety level. When we anticipate the stages in a child's life. When I was when we moved into our new home in North Buffalo back in the 2000s, and we had all the children around the dinner table, all 9 kids, and we were sitting there looking, and I looked across that table and I thought, this is what life is about. This is a moment I want to treasure because this moment won't last forever. It will come to an end. And now when I look at my table, most of the time it's me and that lady sitting over there. Oh my goodness, 20 years ago, we never would have imagined something like that would happen. We were so wrapped up in the day-to-day of who our children were. All of this can cause anxiety. All of it can cause difficulty, cause us to lose sleep, cause us to dream about coming to work in our bathrobes, causing us to cry, causing us to consider what we've done and what we haven't done. Our response is intensely personal whenever something comes to an end in our lives. The time that we need is not proportional to the severity of the change. Remember that. Someone may be grieving the loss of their cat as greatly as the grief that I might feel for my grandmother. Someone may be grieving the loss of their job as much as someone else might grieve the loss of a child. It's not proportional to what we would consider in our brain as to the size and depth and breadth of what had happened. And we need to be sensitive to that in others. Before I had a dog, and people would tell me their loved dog passed away, I would say, oh, that's too bad. I'm so sorry to hear that. Now I understand. Now I understand the pain that can cause. At that time, I didn't think it was all that painful, and I would, why are they carrying on about the loss of this dog? So remember, it's not proportional, and we have to remember that as good friends and lovers and spouses and significant others, that people grieve in their own way, and we need to allow it. We need to take the time that we need to grieve, and remember, regrets are real. I hate that thing when people say, I have no regrets. I'm going to do what I got to do. No, yeah, maybe not. I don't agree with that. Sometimes regrets help us to grow. Sometimes regrets help us to take ownership of the mistakes that we made, because I'm sorry, we all make mistakes. We all do. Even in broken relationships, even in jobs where we get fired. Maybe, I remember once I was working in a bar when I was a teenager, and I came to work one day and I was not on the schedule for the next month. And I thought, oh my gosh, I guess I'm fired. No one told me, but they just didn't put me on. And I kept considering, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? What did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. I was the best employee they ever had. No, I wasn't. We sometimes need to consider, what role did we have in what ended? All right, particularly if it's a change in relationship or a change in jobs. All right. Sometimes it helps to ritualize our ending. Oh my goodness. I had a friend who broke up with her boyfriend, and she took all of his letters and all the things that they shared together and brought it all together that he didn't want. He didn't come pick it up, but she put it all together, and she took it in the backyard and she burned it all, right? She just burned it, threw it into the fire. It sounds silly, right? It doesn't, but it's not. It's not. It's ritualizing that goodbye. It's saying that I'm going to move on now, and it's time to move on. All right? We need to, as I said, take ownership of our mistakes. We need to be able to forgive ourselves when we do make mistakes at the endings, when those endings might not go well. We need to forgive ourselves in those situations, and then we need to leave it behind, because the exciting thing about endings is that there is a new beginning. Every time something leaves our life, there's a void, and we need to fill that void with something else. We can fill it with negativity. We can fill it with regret. We can fill it with bitterness. We can fill it with a desire for retribution for what happened to us. We can fill it with a desire to put somebody in their place and let them know how I feel, right? My son is working for a restaurant in Elmwood that will remain nameless, and he hates his job. He doesn't like it. He's a teenager, and I try to convince him that when you're a teenager, nobody likes a job, right? It's just the way it is. You're not going to find your career. Don't hold out for a management position. You're 19. And he said, when I do quit, I'm going to write a letter, and I'm going to say to my boss, this is what's wrong with it. This is what I did, and you did this to me, and you did that to me. And I said, no, you're not. You're going to write, this will be my last day. Thank you for the opportunity. Right? Retribution is not what it's cut out to be. In the play, The Tempest, Prospero, the role that I play, had been stranded on an island for 12 years because his brother wanted his position in the community. And he had him, with the help of the King of Naples, stranded on an island with his daughter, left him for dead. And then the enemies of his life show up on that island, and he wants to give it to them. He wants them to pay for the pain that he's felt for 12 years. And then in the midst of that, with the help of some good friends, he realizes that the greater action is in virtue than in vengeance. He replaces the emptiness with goodness, and it changes the whole direction of the play. In Shakespeare, everyone dies, right? I did Lear last year, and we killed off everybody. It was wonderful. They were all dead. We were competing with a wedding one night at the terrace, and Lear was carrying out his dead daughter on his own deathbed, ready to die, and he's howling at the moon in his pain, and at the terrace they were going, whoop, there it is, whoop, there it is. But in The Tempest, everyone comes to a conclusion that brings joy and forgiveness and happiness. And there's that moment where the emptiness is replaced with joy. The Tempest is often considered by some scholars as Shakespeare's last play. It was the last one that he wrote. completely. He wrote and dabbled in some others. Some scholars believe this is too sentimental, but my director, Saul Elkins, such a wonderful man in this community, originated 44 years ago, Shakespeare in Delaware Park. He believes that this was Shakespeare's goodbye to the Elizabethan community, and he wanted us to act that way on the stage, that this role of Prospero is Shakespeare saying goodbye. And his ending was coming, because shortly after he wrote this play, Shakespeare died. And he was very concerned about what was his legacy. Do you know that Shakespeare believed that when he died, his plays would die with him? He would never be heard of again, that they would disappear, right? This man who is the paragon of literature in the Western world believed that he would fade into obscurity. And so he worried about his legacy. And in the epilogue of this play, he says some beautiful lines where he laments, but he hopes that the community that he performed for, that he wrote for, would help him to bring this end to a joyful conclusion. And he says, "Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and my strength is my own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true I must be here confined by you, or sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardon the deceiver, dwell in this bare island by your spell, dwell in this stage for the rest of my life. I have to go. But release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. Clap for me, affirm me, make me feel good about what I did. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please." My wife told me the other day that every time I say that line, she wants to stand up and yell out, "You did. You made everyone happy, William Shakespeare. Thank you." It's so true. He says at the very end, "As you from crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free." It's a beautiful ending and a beautiful way for him to step away and ask that the people who heard him and watched him and saw his actors play would remember him. And goodness do we, often to the chagrin of people in high school, but nonetheless we remember him. Consider what your impact in the world is, please, when it comes to an end. Because just as everything in our lives will end, so will we. I have been present as a registered nurse at the bedside of people dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And it's a privilege that I have taken very, very seriously. Not one person, not one, has ever said to me on their deathbed, "I wish I had spent more time in the office." They said, "I wished I had spent more time telling the people I love how much I truly do love them." Remember that. And whether your impact is on the individuals that you have sitting next to you at the dinner table, or across from you in the other cubicle, or in the lab at UB, or wherever it is that you be, make sure that you make an impact that is filled with love. People will remember you, and your legacy will be that it will carry on. We pay it forward all the time, right? Love doesn't die, it carries on. When we give it to another, they pass that on. Don't be so focused on the finance and the... Listen, some of you here are researchers in environmental engineering, aren't you? And you sit in that office and you pore over those figures. Get out of the office and love one another, experience life, and make an impact as a human being. It's so important. I just want to end by saying, John Mayer wrote a song called "Stop This Train." Do you remember that song? Does anybody know that song, "Stop This Train"? And he talks about growing up, and he wants to go home. He's worried about losing his parents. He's anxious about that. And in one of the parts of that song, he says, "I had a talk with my old man, and I asked him to help me understand. There are people in our community, and we can be those people too, where we reach out and offer advice and love and support when it's needed by others. So make sure that you find someone in your life that you can bounce these things off of and give you support, and then give that back in turn. You could be so creative simply by listening sometimes and giving people an avenue to be heard. Pain is real. Grieving is real. All of that is so very real. But when we give someone an opportunity to put it out, it gives them an opportunity to bring closure and to honor the transition that must occur. So as you from crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free. Thank you.